guide a Jack the Ripper tour. Small group, maximum of 12 people, so you won't be following 30 or 40 people through the tiny lanes of Whitechapel. And to make sure you get every single word of this amazing story, I use a radio transmitter with a microphone and you get a radio receiver with an earpiece. The question I get asked more than any, of course, on the tour is who was Jack the Ripper? It's a question that's been asked countless times ever since the murders happened in 1888. It's been answered many times. Many suggestions have been made. However, none of those suggestions has universal approval. It remains simply a guess. And the guessing game began right at the beginning of the investigation. As the man in charge of the investigation on the ground, Inspector Aberline, said at the time, "Theories. We were almost lost in theories. There were so many of them." In thinking about the Jack the Ripper murders, it might be worth looking at how the police investigated them. That may be asking if the police were ill-equipped to deal with an investigation like this. Obviously, they lacked much that a modern police force would have at their disposal. Computer technology and forensic science, including the major breakthrough that came with DNA testing. They've all been huge gifts to the modern police force. Back in 1888, the use of fingerprinting in criminal investigations was still 14 years away. Back then, they couldn't even tell the difference between animal blood and human blood, let alone identify human blood groups. But were the police guilty of basic failings? Because of bias that might have led to unwarranted assumptions? Were they lacking in imagination? Much detective fiction around the time certainly enjoyed painting the police as dullards who were not quite up to the job. Much of the entertainment in Arthur Conan Doyle's famous creation centres around baffled police officers dazzled by the genius of the amateur detective Sherlock Holmes. Agatha Christie used the same idea with Miss Marple, who played on her amateur status to outwit the unsuspecting criminal. Agatha Christie's other super sleuth, Hercule Poirot, he ran rings around the Met's finest, although, to be fair, he was a retired police officer. Did the very origins of policing handicap them? In some form or other, policing has been part of human societies around the world ever since the first kingdoms developed in China, India, Persia, Egypt, Greece, and the Americas, as people were divided into a ruling class and those that were ruled. Some form of policing to maintain order in these unequal societies became essential. For centuries, society in London has always been unequal. By the 18th century, it was very unequal. And when, in 1748, the 8-year-long War of Austrian Succession ended, thousands of demobbed soldiers filled London's streets, and a crime wave swept over the city. 1 year later, in 1749, Henry Fielding founded the Bow Street Runners, the forerunner of the modern police force. Apart from being a writer of fiction, including his novel The History of Tom Jones, Fielding was a magistrate. The Bow Street Runners were based at Henry Fielding's office at his home, number 4 Bow Street. They worked under and were paid through the magistrate's office. They didn't patrol the streets, but would travel the country, arresting people on the authority of the magistrate. The rise of the highway robber saw the founding of the Bow Street Horse Patrol in 1763. In 1798, the Marine Police Force was founded, with 220 constables and 1,000 registered dock workers to combat large-scale theft on the River Thames. Then 1822 saw the biggest changes in policing in London when Sir Robert Peel became Home Secretary. He managed to get a bill through Parliament that aimed to create a strong but politically neutral police force to maintain social order. The Bobby on the beat gets his name from Robert Bobby Peel. And Peeler, of course, was an early nickname for a police constable. The police constables were armed with a wooden truncheon and a wooden rattle to call for assistance. The wooden rattle was replaced in 1884 by a whistle, which could be heard at a greater distance. Peel wanted the new police force to avoid the charge of being a tool of government repression. He said, "The police are the public, and the public are the police." Many in society have believed that, as Peel intended, the power of the police depends on the public approval of their existence, actions and behaviour. So the aim for Peel was to have policing by consent. But policing by consent can be a challenge. The police have the power to arrest, and a monopoly on the legal use of violence. This has sometimes led to corruption and discrimination against certain sectors of society. Recent revelations about our modern-day police forces show that corruption and discrimination have not been entirely eliminated. Another barrier to policing by consent in a very unequal society is that the police will always be at the front line in trying to maintain order. In a very unequal society, many will argue that the police become simply one part of the apparatus that allows a ruling class to continue to subjugate the working class. A working class that in the 19th century frequently appeared to be on the brink of outright revolution. On Sunday, November 13, 1887, an event occurred that some believed would be the spark to light that revolution. The event became known as Bloody Sunday, and it strengthened the view of some that the chief role of the police was to suppress the working class when necessary. On Sunday, November 13, 1887, a demonstration demanding a change for those at the bottom of society gathered in Trafalgar Square. The Metropolitan Police, armed with truncheons and supported by infantry and cavalry, cleared the square. Bloody Sunday happened just months before the police of London would have to confront a wave of mass hysteria surrounding the brutal attacks on 8 women in Whitechapel. This Bloody Sunday for the Metropolitan Police meant that public approval of their existence, actions and behaviour sank to an all-time low. In the search for Jack the Ripper, the police needed all the help they could get. The impact of Bloody Sunday on the attitude of many, especially those at the very bottom of society in London's East End, made that help more difficult to get. Thank you for checking out this post, and I hope you'll check out the next, when we will look at how the Metropolitan Police Force and the City of London Police faced up to Jack the Ripper. And I hope I'll get to see you on one of my Jack the Ripper walks, when you can check out the Jack the Ripper crime scenes with me.